It's almost the end of August, and this is InGoal Radio, the podcast, working our way through the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs. Darren Millard, along with the co-founders of InGoal Magazine, Kevin Woodley and David Hutchison. And gentlemen, as we work our way through the final 8 in the Stanley Cup playoffs and the second round of the postseason, we are adding up to our number of teams that have played multiple goaltenders. I know this was a topic of conversation going into the playoffs and the round robin, and it has grown. The Boston Bruins, can we all say, welcome to the club. Thanks for being the first through the door to play 3 different goaltenders, Hutch. This is some place that I didn't expect us to go, but it's become a reality. At the start, when everybody's putting their rosters together, unlimited goaltenders, and you're wondering, will that happen? Like some teams took 4 goaltenders. Boston's played 3.
You're just doing it to rub it in with me, aren't you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Because I didn't think as many. You said, was it 10 teams would use 2 guys?
Yes, I called double digits.
That was the over-under, and I took the under, and I've been shamed again. Once again, don't look to me for any goaltending predictions. Great to see all these guys getting in, and we've got Colorado's had to reach outside the bubble now to bring Hunter Miska in to the fold as well, now that they've gone with a second goaltender, and we saw a couple more teams add them this week as well. So what's the number at, Woody?
I'm not good at math, but it's higher than what you predicted.
Oh, I thought you were keeping track because you wanted to rub it in.
Yeah, no. I just need to know. I mean, frankly, I stopped keeping track after we passed your over-under a while ago. So,
we got to the point of now how many teams haven't used 2 guys.
Yeah, well, I thought we were going to see 3 from Colorado the other night, the way things were going for Pavel Francouz. That way we might see Michael Hutchison and the all-full right tandem there. It's it's been amazing to watch not just the number of goalies, but the ebbs and flows from tight defensive series to absolutely fire wagon hockey in some of them, and the goaltenders at times suffering as a result.
Do you think there's some attrition now? We've reached the stage 3 rounds into this thing where goaltenders are starting to wear down without that base of the regular season?
I think guys are wearing down, but I think we also have to remember that the teams are wearing down. I mean, we've always talked about the playoffs being a war of attrition, about those bumps and bruises adding up, and now we're seeing back-to-backs, and now we're seeing guys living in a bubble, and I think there's a combination of effects going on. For sure, we're seeing some struggles in the net, but we're seeing some significant struggles around them as well, and we have to see it. I believe we have to see this as a combined result.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to remember that because I do think we're seeing some fatigue in some guys in some of these back-to-backs, and I don't think it's not going to get better as we move forward because they've said there's going to be back-to-backs throughout. Maybe the cup final won't have it, but the plan is to have them in the conference finals, at least the last time I checked, to still possibly have back-to-back games, still maintain this compressed schedule. There's not going to be any gaps. And we saw it with the Canucks. They went straight from the first round or the play-in or the first.
Yeah, that series was moved up.
Yeah, so they want to get this done, right? And so that series went from finishing the first round to starting the second round in 2 days. Both of them had back-to-backs built in. I'm not saying like Jacob Markstrom's going to be fatiguing, but eventually this starts to add up. There isn't the recovery time of, hey, finish the series in 5 games and get 3 days off or 4 days off. There's not a lot of recovery time built in. And yes, they're not traveling and that matters. But man, there's nothing like the intensity of playoff hockey. And so to go through it, especially for teams that aren't using tandems, that don't have a second guy they're willing to start in those back-to-backs, I can't help but think there's going to be a cumulative effect. And Hutch is right to point out that, that includes the team too. And, poor team performance obviously puts more weight on the goaltender.
I'll put it another way. Of the 8 teams left in the Stanley Cup playoffs as we speak and record this episode, 4 of them are either going with the goaltender that didn't start the postseason, or their situation is fluid in that people are asking who's going to start that night. So we are in a different realm right now.
And some of them are injury related too, right? Like obviously,
absolutely.
Grubauer goes down
Or
to Colorado,
Boston.
Tuukka leaves to tend to some family emergencies. Dallas, like Ben Bishop just hasn't been healthy throughout this whole thing, right? And we called that too. Like you can't look at that and say, well, it's injuries, it doesn't matter. No, the injuries are in some cases directly because you jumped into a season after 4 months off. Like this was predictable. So it's fascinating to watch, unique circumstances. And still a couple of teams riding a workhorse, right? Like Carter Hart's the guy in Philly, and I don't think they're going to change that anytime soon. Jacob Markstrom, we talked about in Vancouver. Vasilevsky, Carey Price, and before Montreal was eliminated with Price. Vass is what, 25, 26, still pretty young. Jacob's 30. Jaro Halak, I thought at the age of 35, we saw some fatigue. And Hutch, again, got no help in front of him last night.
None.
But I thought there were also signs of fatigue in his game at the age of 35 playing back-to-back. So you ended up seeing Dan Vladar anyways in his NHL debut, and what a tough spot to come in. But a lot of people completely dismissed and poo-pooed the concept of starting Vladar, and now you've got Halak having to play 4 and 6 the next time.
I don't know what was said, what was happening during that conversation when Yaroslav Halak, between the second and the third period, had a conversation with Dan outside the locker room, and looked like the older guy taking the younger guy who just made his NHL debut under his wing a little bit.
Yeah, maybe some of that, but also probably like knowing Yaro a little bit. I bet you there's a little bit of helping the kid, but also probably feeling a little bit bad about it, like about having put him in that spot for his NHL debut. Like, hey, this is because I couldn't perform, and again, no help in front of him, but I put you in this spot of having to come in here and listen, don't worry about it. Other unique one beyond just goaltending performance. We've talked about unique aspects of this bubble to go back to Halak. We had it on our Instagram page after I noticed it on the CBC broadcast. The guys did a great job of picking it up. Jaro had gone to the bench midway through the period for some skate work, but he also changed his gloves. And they said on the broadcast that this is a regular thing for him. He changes the set of gloves he's wearing halfway through every period, which raised my eyebrows because I know it's not a regular thing for him. Maybe it has been in the bubble, but I've watched Jaro enough to know I've never seen that because I would have noticed it. Well, it turns out, reached out to Chris Joswiak from Brian's, and absolutely, it is now a regular thing in the bubble because it's so much hotter there. And so he feels like he's sweating more. And so instead of swapping between periods, he's there being the extra sets going on the drying rack, and he's actually swapping during the TV timeout midway through every period just to get a fresh, tacky set of gloves on his hands. So, again, this bubble has been really unique, and goaltenders have reacted differently, and I think we need to take that into consideration. Even the no fans thing. There are some guys who just get up and get amped based on crowd, like that's part of their mechanism, and they don't have that. Here's an example where, right down to equipment needing to be changed because of the heat, because of the ice conditions. I'm wondering if sharpenings are different. It's just such a weird situation.
We also have a bit of a development on the goaltending carousel that we expect after the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we'll get into free agency with all the UFAs and the RFAs. But Jimmy Rutherford Hutch has gone public saying he's waiting to get offers on a goaltender, and Tristan Jarry and Matt Murray will not be the tandem for next year. So we get a bit of a heads up on, don't know where one of them will go and who's going to stay, but looks like that will be one of the first things to drop on this wild 2020.
Yeah, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that one of those guys has to go because we have the expansion draft looming, and they're both solid young goaltenders. One a two-time Stanley Cup champ, and another that's sort of supplanted him in the crease to an extent this year, with the exception of those playoff starts. So I don't think it's any surprise at all, but it's fun to hear that they're already looking at this, and we know that the teams who are out of the playoff can actually make transactions now. So it is exciting to see the carousel going. And it's probably going to have to move really fast when it happens, because we're looking at one of the biggest seasons of moves, both in terms of the number of guys who are available now, the number of teams that are looking for support, and then obviously the impact of the expansion draft, because they're not the only team that's going to be looking to move some goaltenders, because there's a lot of talent on teams. Eh, Woody?
Yeah, and a little bit of insight on the Pittsburgh situation. I don't think anybody's surprised. Jim Rutherford has been open about this coming, and they have Casey DeSmith there in a number 3 role, proven that he can play in the NHL already.
Already had a full season.
My information is that it's Matt Murray is the one they're trying to move, and that's who teams are being asked about and looking into out of those two. And they're not going to be the only ones. Like, this is the thing. You touched on unrestricted free agency, and it's always a game of musical chairs from the goaltending community. this one will be like no other. Like we could have Jaro Halak or Halak signed a discount deal during the pause to stay in Boston. Anton Hudobin could go from 1B to Stanley Cup winner to free agency in a matter of days. Robin Lehner, Jacob Markstrom,
and the flat cap impact too. Don't forget that as well.
All potential unrestricted free agents. Not just the flat cap, but no more courting period, at least publicly. You're not allowed to it's going to actually be a bidding war. Yeah. The courting period is gone. And expansion draft, there are other teams that are going to move goaltenders. I mean, Darren, we've heard it in Vegas with everything that happened in the tweet, and we don't have to get into it, but is it possible that Lehner gets a contract and Marc-Andre Fleury's on the market? Henrik Lundqvist is on the market. Potentially. If not, Alexander Georgiev is out of New York, another good goaltender. All the list on unrestricted free agency. There was a report the other day that the Oilers had been talking to Columbus and some buzz there that, again, nobody has a deeper talent pool in goal than Columbus. They're not going to be able to keep Korpisalo and Merzlikins through the expansion draft. Could we see a trade there? You'd be selling at Korpisalo at an absolute high. And this is a franchise.
Markstrom resigns in Vancouver, and you've got Demko sitting there too.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got in the Korpisalo case, a franchise in Columbus that gave away William Karlsson, who has turned out just fine. Thank you very much for the Vegas Golden Knights. They gave him away in order to protect Jonas Korpisalo. So it's right. It was already shaping up to be the most dynamic game of musical chairs we'd ever seen for goaltenders. And it's just, you add the expansion draft, you add the shortened window coming out of it, and you add some teams that are frankly probably going to overreact to performance in the playoff bubble rather than just saying this is a unique
you just
circumstance.
Mentioned.
Yep. And it's going to be amazing to watch.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but right now you have 3 of the final 8 goaltenders are unrestricted. So there's almost a 50-50 chance if you just go on those odds. That's amazing that the goaltender winning the Stanley Cup would be unrestricted. That's crazy.
We could very much have it'd be like the Barry Trotz situation in goal. You know what I mean? Where you can win a Stanley Cup and just go right to market right away. And at top of my head, I can't remember seeing that. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't, but I certainly don't remember.
The last one I remember was and he wasn't a starter, but when Dallas won, and this is how long ago it goes. Roman Turek was traded before he was the backup. He was traded before the parade during that one. So, but that goes back just a little bit to the previous millennium. So.
And we talk about goalies being left behind when the music stops and there's only so many chairs, but I think some teams will be left behind in terms of moving their number 2 guy to avoid the expansion draft. There're going to be some chairs that will already be filled, and somebody will be left with 2 goaltenders and having to do something extra to protect them.
And the other part here is I've said for a while now that this was always going to be a buyer's market for goaltending in the summer. And that if you're smart, you're not going to have to overspend here. You're going to get a deal. I would consider it the same with trades. That's probably why a Jim Rutherford is getting out ahead of this. Probably why that the report out of Edmonton about Columbus didn't shock me, because your alternative is to wait, and all you do is depreciate the asset. Because I don't care how good the guy is. And in Columbus's case, I think Elvis and Corpy are still 1-2 in save percentage in the playoffs on the list, right? Look, as much as they didn't get very far, it looks pretty good sitting on atop that list. Selling high versus waiting and being you can't trade a goaltender to a team that already has a goaltender, because then they got 2 and then they got to make an expansion decision. At the end of the day, there's a lot of tough decisions. A lot of teams are going to be in a really good spot if they make the right one. And you're right, Hutch, you could see some either with a depreciated asset, or worst of all, imagine being a team that makes the wrong call and ends up with the wrong guy coming out of all of this with so many options.
And don't just think, that depreciation is going to happen overnight. You hear the word depreciation, you think, well, if I wait too long, eventually I won't get my price, but that market's going to crash in an instant.
Yeah, and it's already deflated. Goaltending, this is the reason that, frankly, some teams we see some teams, they invest in it. They turn out guys they already have. Look at the Kings with Jonathan Quick and all the guys they've turned out behind them and then turn them into other things through trades. But for the most part, the market on goaltending has been so depreciated that teams don't actually see a ton of value in that. Because, hey, we can turn out a great 1B, can't keep him because we need to move him because he needs to play, and we got a guy. But what are we really getting for him? Like, the return hasn't always been great in those situations.
And even if you do believe in it, who's actually got the money to spend this summer?
Yeah, you have to find the money sometimes.
Well, and this year, worse than any other, really.
Right. The extensive, incredible list of goaltenders that require new contracts after this playoffs is unprecedented. And adding to that urgency is the expansion draft and the arrival of the Seattle Kraken. And that is where we go to for our feature interview this week. Woody?
Yeah, Andrew Allen. Actually, it's funny. We were talking about this. I never thought it's the perfect segue to Andrew, who has to sort through all this, or along with the management staff, Ron Francis and all the team he's assembled, and by all accounts, a great team already with the Seattle Kraken. They're the ones that have to figure this all out and maximize the value. Listen, Andrew's a guy, this is going to come through in the interview, so I don't want to spoil it. Every time Buffalo came through town, I'd heard about him and heard a lot of good things from the goalies coming through the Chicago system when he was with Rockford. This is just how it is. You talk to goalies about who they've worked with, and every time Andrew's name came up, it was in glowing terms. And then when he started to come through town with the Sabres, I introduced myself, and we just started to have conversations in the locker room. It's funny because, no joke, it would be like, and pretty good group of guys. Linus Ullmark is, as you heard last week, he loves his gear, and he'll sit and talk gear. And Carter Hutton's a guy that, long conversations with Hutton. It would end up being the four of us just sitting in a corner of the room in Vancouver and just sort of talking goaltending for a while. His passion comes through. As you'll hear, he probably doesn't continue down the path with this career if not for that passion. I always love talking goaltending with Andrew, and this interview is no exception. So I know our audience will enjoy it as well.
I was excited to meet Andrew Allen through this interview in listening to your conversation. And for those subscribing to InGoal Radio, the podcast, who don't know him, this is going to be a fun journey to watch as he joins the Seattle Kraken. Here is Andrew Allen, the feature interview on InGoal Radio, the podcast with Kevin Woodley.
Andrew, first off, we got to ask you, obviously, about the latest announcement. I had heard that you had been doing some work sort of independently with them a little bit, but official now, pro scout for the Seattle Kraken. By the way, the best name in pro sports right now. How excited are you? And I know you probably can't give away too much, but what's the job? What's the role right now for you as you prepare for that first expansion draft still a ways down the road?
Well, yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on, and real excited to be here. And I agree, the Seattle Kraken, I'm repping it here. I got the hat on. Great logo, great. I loved how they even announced everything. It was really well done. They're a first-class organization, and it's fun to be a part of them. And I'm tasked with basically building a goalie scout database on all our American League and NHL goalies in preparation for the expansion draft. And at this point, it's a lot of fun just basically playing around. And as we get a little bit closer, we'll be narrowing down and finding guys that fit for our franchise. But it's a lot of fun at this point, and just surrounded by really great people.
I heard a lot about the sort of front office that they've built there. Obviously, Ron Francis and the history he had in Carolina. There seems to be a real sort of modern vibe, up-to-date vibe on analytics and everything. When you talk about looking at all these goaltenders, I'm guessing you're painting with a pretty broad brush right now. Like, are you like, it is a wide swath. Anything could happen between now and then. How much time do you get to dig in on each one? How much do you rely on? Obviously, with the Buffalo Sabres, you would have been tasked with building pretty extensive pre-scouts on a lot of these guys. Anybody you would have faced, how much is that still applicable? Do you look at a guy and compare it to a pre-scout 2 years ago and see changes in their game? What's that process like for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I did know all the NHL goalies quite well, and still some of the American League goalies as well. So it was fun when I started to look back at my notes from my time in Buffalo and from my pre-scouts and compare to what they were in my mind then to what they are and what I did see from them this season and continue to see here in the playoffs. So it's been great for me. I feel like I'm well suited for it because I have that knowledge. I've been around these goalies and been pre-scouting and watching them and had some of them myself, obviously, in knowing them as we move forward. And then that's basically it at this point, just getting to know everybody, getting information in the database, and so that I can share the knowledge with everybody in the organization. And then we'll make informed decisions when the time comes for us to make decisions.
Have you noticed how much the game has changed watching it from this perspective? Obviously, you were in it in Buffalo. Just the different asks now for a goaltender in terms of what breeds success, and without, asking you guys to give away what that checklist would look like, but have you seen a shift just the way it's no secret the game's become so dynamic east-west in terms of what works against that these days, even compared to just even 2-3 years ago? It feels like there's a real shift there.
Yeah. What I'm seeing from watching, and like you said, I'm kind of was out of it this winter and this season, watching from a different perspective, not in the really focused on every goal that's going in and goals against on my goaltenders. I'm able to watch a game and just truly evaluate both goaltenders as the game goes on. And the shift, obviously the game's gotten faster. And like you just said, east to west, I find there's been a big shift in reaction speed and edge control. And it's not, obviously you still have to be positionally sound, but there's more athleticism to the game and more quickness from a reaction speed standpoint. You're seeing a lot of goalies have a lot of success that are quick and not just kind of one dimensional. They're more quickness and can adapt to different situations quite quickly. I take like a Shesterkin or someone who came from the American League to be in the year to the NHL, him as an example where that dynamic speed and that dynamic reaction speed is something that's a lot of fun to watch. It's making the game faster and better, and the goaltenders are adapting to it.
And it's funny because we've had a few stories over the course of this year, both at InGoal and NHL.com with the Unmasked column, about the importance of unpredictability and how you can't always give a shooter the same look. We see how they're increasing their deception. You have to throw that a little back. Is that something you can look at from a scouting report? For me, my little brain only goes to technique. I'm not complex enough beyond sort of simple things, but obviously dynamic, like you said, the ability to move dynamically, but the ability to execute dynamically. Is that part of evaluating now, where a couple of years ago, I'm not sure that would have been a big part of it?
Yeah, I find it is, because I find when you're watching games, I like to watch the entire game as well, not just goalie, not just saves and goalie touches. I want to get a sense for the game. When are they making these saves? Is this timely? Is this are they getting into a situation where they're scrambling and they make a big save and it's 3 minutes left in the game and a tie game, or are they down 6-0? So all that does play in for me. And I think there's no, exact checklist for something that is something that you see and you're like, wow, that's something that's not as teachable. That's something that's very natural, and that speed of it. And so there's certain things that pop out in my mind that oh, wow, I like that. That's something that you can work around, and something that a goaltender brings to the table that maybe that another goaltender doesn't.
It's part of what we love about the position. What I've always loved about it is there is no, like you said, there is no one formula with those checklists. Everybody has a different blend. I guess it's just a matter of sort of figuring out what blend's going to work as the game itself changes.
Yeah, for sure. And consistency is a huge word, right? And goaltenders have to find their own game, their own style that makes them the most consistent, that gives their team a chance to win more often than not, night in and night out. And those are the guys you see become the best. Everybody's good now. You're watching all these guys play American League, NHL. There's a lot of good goaltending out there. And it's just what separates guys that you project to be the best in the world, guys you project to be the top level. And everybody's got their own little things. And I pick up on things that I find help me project guys to reach different heights.
No, you're still doing some coaching with Goaltenders by Andrew Allen in the school. I know everything has changed, because I have to leave it as an open-ended question, because depending on where everyone is, even getting ice these days can be really hard. And so everybody's been affected differently. Do you still get a chance to get on the ice and work with guys? And do you still have a passion for that side of it too, obviously?
I do. I definitely do. And I have young minor hockey age children, and I get out with their teams. And obviously in March, everything did where I'm in Ontario, and everything did get shut down initially, and you go from 110 miles an hour to 0, and it was quite a shift. And I'm sure pretty much everybody was in the same situation. Around here in the Niagara Falls area, just outside Toronto, rinks opened up again right at the beginning of July. And then I was able to get back on the ice. I'd planned to do a summer camp for kids, and I had it all set up, and we decided against it based on numbers. But I was able to get on in small, 1 or 2 goalies on the ice based on the COVID-19 protocols around here. So I've been on since about the beginning of July, a little bit, enough to be a lot of fun and help out some kids in the area, and it keeps me invigorated and refreshed with it as well.
Well, I was going to ask you, because you were still doing that while coaching in the National League and coaching in the American Hockey League before that as well, right? Because I've seen the schedule that you guys put in. I've watched the hours on video. I know how much of a grind the NHL season is for coaches. I'm not sure everyone appreciates just how much it is and how much that travel can take you away from the family. So to still be involved at the youth level, what's the takeaway for you? What's the benefit? We've had this conversation, sadly off the record because now he's with the Islanders, but Mitch Korn's talked about that. I was used to bug him like, how are you going on all these like road trip camps all summer after grinding so much? What for you is the value in keeping involved at that grassroots level? Is there benefits even even when you go back to working with pros?
Yeah, I think for me, first and foremost, it was to help give back. I had so many people help me along the way, that any coach I can help, any student, any goalie that I can help at a young age, to me is all the better. I had lots of help along the way, and you do need help. So that was first and foremost. It gave me a chance to get out with my own kids on their practice ice as well. Neither one of them are goaltenders, but it gave me a chance to be out with them and involved with their teams when I could be. Obviously, I didn't see a lot of games for a few years there, but this past winter I got to see quite a few games, so that was a lot of fun. But I always found too, even when I was coaching before I started in Chicago in the development goaltending coach role, and then in Buffalo. When I used to coach even younger kids, as you're talking it through a certain situation, say a post-play situation, and you're almost justifying yourself as you're saying it. I'm like, am I going through this properly? Is there something new? Is there something? And so I find coaching at whatever level, you're always talking, you're always communicating. It keeps me relevant, and it keeps me understanding where the game's going, and should I be changing this, or should I keep that same philosophy? So I do find it does help me, no matter what the age of the kid is, that it does help. I really do.
I was going to ask you, are the kids not goalies because of dad, or is that just a wise decision as a guy who's been around it all his life? I don't want to have to deal with it here too, or they just haven't gravitated towards it?
Well, we're on the air here, but I'm going to blame my wife, because my wife, I've been with my wife a long time, even in my pro career. So she saw the ups and downs of East Coast League to the American League to the NHL, back and down and all that. So she wasn't real fond. She was my mental skills. We didn't have that as much then. She was my mental skills coach. She was my support system. And she didn't want to go through it with two more goalies. So it's something that I just wanted them to play and enjoy. And neither one, my son's older. He did gravitate towards the net a little bit. But overall, they're both defensemen. So they're both thinking, they're both helping goal.
Well, we can't have them being mindless forwards. They've got to at least contribute to the goalie union a little bit. So that's a positive. Now it's a perfect segue to the career, because before you coached, you played. University of Vermont, 4 years there, and then a pro career that, 5 years between the AHL and the ECHL. I think 8 teams in 5 years, if I did the math correctly. And as long as we're in single digits, I can count to that. Including your first full year pro, 4 different teams. So I couldn't help but notice too, also the era. Like, to me, as you're starting your pro career around 2000, 2001, 01, 02, that to me is like, that's what, like, maybe it's just my personal bias, because that's when I started learning about the position through a guy like Ian Clark. But it feels like that was a point where I would talk to guys in the NHL, and proper leg recovery wasn't something they all did, but it was being taught. Like, to me, that was a real part of the shift towards the level of teaching and goalie coaches everywhere and in that era. So, long-winded question, but Andrew Allen graduating from the University of Vermont from a style perspective, playing pro those 5 years through that transition. What kind of goaltender were you when you started, when you finished, and how much of sort of playing pro at a time when the game was changing so much for goalies, like, did that form you at all as a goalie coach after you were done?
It's a great question. And that first year pro for me, I learned so much. And I had Ian Clark. I was under contract with the Florida Panthers, and Ian Clark was the goalie coach. And I met Ian in training camp, and I was on the ice with Roberto Luongo, Trevor Kidd, me, Wade Flaherty. I got to know Wade Flaherty really well, and I'm friends with him to this day through that whole experience. We actually were together on 9/11. That's in our hotel room. And so Wade Flaherty's has been entwined with my whole hockey career. And what I noticed, so coming out of college, I was a big, lanky, 6'4" goaltender that I was quite raw. I wasn't a technically perfect goalie by any means. I did a lot, I believe, on basically work ethic. But I noticed in that first training camp with Ian Clark that footwork was everything. Everything we did was based on edge control and being balanced and being in position that we can recover instead of reaching as much, instead of ending up back or ending up forward. And that was an eye opener for me, that first training camp, and that has stayed with me through my whole playing career and coaching career. To me, footwork, edge control is the base of goaltending, and that started for me with Ian Clark there in Florida. And I got to come up at the end of the year, and I backed up the last 2 games of the regular season. So it wouldn't be even in the stats because I got no minutes. So I actually was on 5 teams that year, including the Florida Panthers. So I got to work with Ian again at the end of the year, which was great, just to pick his brain and be a part of all that. And we didn't have at that time the developmental goaltending coaches, so you were pretty much on your own from that standpoint. When you're in the minors, so it was. So I learned a lot. I was in a lot of places that year, but got to see all 3 levels in North American Pro, and got to see the difference in how much as you move up a level, the quickness, you need better feet. You need to be in position quicker. The releases are quicker. They try to get you before you get set. So it was a great learning experience that first year pro.
It's funny. I'm going to have to throw out the caveat here. I had no idea. I forgot about that. I knew you were in Florida at one point, but I totally forgot that it was an Ian Clark thing. People are going to think that every interview I do is naturally that I'm picking people to tie back to Ian Clark, but it is amazing whether it's, we talk about Children of the Corn and, the Allaire brothers, Ian intersects through a lot of these paths as well. So I shouldn't be surprised. And yet people are going to be like, geez, what? Like we just had one of your former pupils, Linus Ullmark, on last week. And I'd forgotten that his moto journey was also with Ian Clark early on. So I swear, folks, I'm not setting this up on purpose, but Ian has that kind of impact. So early in your career, you learned that. Interesting that you would have gone through, like you said, not a lot of support at the minor league level. I mean, a lot of NHL teams didn't have a goalie coach or didn't have a true, what we think of in the sense of the word now, and let alone in the minors. These days, although I would argue some teams could maybe spend right down to the East Coast League and help some young goalies even more, you're at least going to get that support in most organizations in the AHL. Where do you come out on that balance between wanting to make sure these kids have that support as a young pro, but also do you have to be careful not to hold their hand too much? Do you have to be careful to not make them so dependent on you that they can't manage their own game? Something you would have had to learn to do as a young pro yourself. Where do you find that balance?
I think so. When I was in the developmental goaltending coach role with the Blackhawks, I found a really good balance on not being with the goalies all the time. So my first priority was the 2 American League goalies in Rockford. Now, our first priority was to get them ready for the NHL on any given day, right? They could get called up. But I wasn't there with them every single day. Was I available to talk every single day? Yes, of course. After a game, after morning skate, something's going on. But when I was in town, we worked technical. We worked on their game. When I was out of town, I would go over video and I would talk them through it from afar. Now, it would have been great to have Zoom and all this then, but we didn't. But then you're also in touch with the guys in the East Coast League, and you're seeing them once a month, maybe twice a month. You're also talking to whoever's in junior. My first year in Chicago, I had Matt Caruth and Kent Simpson, both in Portland and Everett, 3 hours apart or whatever. I think it was less than 3 hours anyways. And I'd drive up and down the coast there on a trip and see them both play, get on the ice with them both. And then you have European guys as well and draft picks. So I found it's great to have somebody who understands what you're going through. So I went through all these levels of hockey. So I was able to help them as much mentally, as much preparing themselves to be a pro, preparing themselves for games than you do the X's and O's, the technique on the ice. So I think it's a great model that the NHL teams have these development roles, but I don't think you need to be there every single day. In the NHL, you got a guy there every single day. Well, your job in the NHL is to win hockey games. That is the end all be all. Whereas everywhere else outside the NHL is to prepare to get to the NHL so you can win hockey games. So it's for me, it was a great role, and I believe I'm very happy all the NHL teams have those roles now because the kids do need support, but they do need to figure out part of it on their own.
You mentioned be a pro, and we hear that a lot. Can you explain? And we've had different people explain, especially goalies. It amazes me sometimes that we hear guys figure it out. They've already been in the NHL for a little while before they figure it out. And then we see them take off. I mean, and they're the first ones to admit it. I'm thinking of Chris Dreger. We had him on the podcast a few months ago. And there's a guy who, didn't have the success people had hoped for until just like he hit that level this year. And he talked about changing everything and being a pro. What advice would you give when we throw out that term in terms of specifics? Are those habits you can start at a younger age? Is it off ice? Like who you're friends with, what you eat? Like if you had a 15 or 16-year-old even starting junior, are there things that they can start to do to make sure that by the time they get there, they at least have a foundation of what it means to be a pro?
Yes, I believe it's something we should be talking to our younger kids about. Obviously, you don't have all the amenities and everything that the pros have at their advantage from an off ice and consultants and all this as much. Nowadays, there is kids younger getting nutritionists and things like this. But it's I believe at a younger age, you start talking about what a professional is. A professional comes to work every day ready to go, not just shows up and say, okay, now I'm going to be good when I get on the ice. They think about it all the time. What am I doing today to prepare to be good for practice? What goals am I setting for myself? What team goals am I setting? All to the point, how do I recover after? Do I just take off my gear and walk out? Or am I stretching out? Am I trying to become as close as I can be to a professional without yet being a professional? I believe that is the start. Then it's easier. Then you have those habits. You have those work habits. And then you learn as you go. You learn the mental side of it, how to deal with, well, I'm playing better than the other goalie, but he's playing over me. And the big word, hockey politics, things that you can't control. It's how do you come to the rink every day and let your mind be in a place that your body can just react naturally. You're not thinking about what if, I'm getting hard done to, or this guy, that guy. Oh, I don't know. What happens if I get called up? What happens if this? Or what scout's going to see me today? That's things that I did in my head. And I think I would have been a better goalie if I would have been able to find a way to compartmentalize that. So I think we can teach kids a little bit younger now, just the day-to-day, what it takes to be a professional. And like you said, a lot of guys enter the pro ranks and have got there a lot on skill and talent alone. And they have to learn that, everybody's good now, and I really need to bring it every day, make an impression every day in a positive way that my team and my coaching staff and my organization are confident that I'm their guy, and how do you deal with it when you're not their guy? And guys like Chris Dreger, that for a while there, he was in the minors, he was doing his thing, and then he got an opportunity and he seized it, and some guys might not be prepared to seize it. So that's a long-winded answer, but I do feel it is something that we can ingrain at a younger age. It will make it easier, but it always is a transition to see how important it is as they move higher to take care of yourself, both on and off the ice, and give yourself the best opportunity to get opportunities.
Okay, now I jumped ahead there. We started talking about your time with the Blackhawks, started talking about the time with Buffalo. I skipped over how you became a goalie coach. I want to know the story, how you go from playing in the Coast and the American League with the Providence Bruins in that last year in 04-05. And that's an accomplishment to get any time in the AHL in 04-05 because, of course, that was a lockout year and it was packed with talented goaltenders. So how do you go from that to working with the Japanese national team from 06 to 2011? Like, how did that transition start for you to goalie coach? When did you know? And the opportunity, how'd you end up in Japan? Or was it even in Japan? Or how'd you end up working for the Japanese national team? I need to hear this story.
I learned how to bow. I know that. I definitely learned how to bow. It was an unbelievable experience. My last year playing was the lockout year in 04-05, and I got up to Providence for a while. And Patrice Bergeron was there because he had been in the NHL as an 18-year-old, and he played in the American League that year. And I was up when he left for the World Juniors. That was the year that was him, Crosby, and was it Corey Perry? I forget. Anyways, their line was unbelievable in North Dakota when Canada won gold. I played most of that year in Trenton in the East Coast League, and we won the Kelly Cup. So I had such a great last experience, and I could have went to Europe. We thought about it, but we decided that, you know what, it's better to kind of get on with life. And that year at Christmas, I'd gotten a government job in Ottawa, and that year at Christmas, a guy from my hometown, his name's Mark Mahan, and he was the Japanese national team head coach. And he said, I may have an opportunity for you in Japan. I'm like, what's it all about? And he goes, well, we're looking for a goalie consultant. And for our whole program, it wasn't just the men's team, it was men's, women's, junior. We want somebody to come over and basically get our goalies at a higher level and teach the goalie coaches as well what needs to be done. So that's how it came about. It was unbelievable experience. I was still working a government job in Ottawa, taking time, leave without pay for time away. I was a goalie coach for the University of Ottawa men's team at that same point. I also was volunteer goalie coach at St. Lawrence University on the U.S. side. It was an easy drive to Ottawa. So I had many irons. I was doing kids coaching in Ottawa at the same time, just trying to keep as many irons in the fire as I could. And the Japan thing was basically a 12-week contract per year where I met them. Parts of it was in Japan in training sessions. And then we also met them at different world championships or different pre-world championships places all over. We were everywhere, Sweden, Finland, Canada. We trained in Calgary sometimes with the Canadian women's program, all over. I saw places in the world I never thought I'd see. So it was unbelievable experience. They were so good to me over there, and I would have continued doing it, but I got that developmental role with the Blackhawks, and I had to leave the role. But I still stay in touch with people over there and watch them closely. That's
a heck of a grind to be not so much just the Japan, but the fact I didn't know about I knew about St. Lawrence, but I didn't know about the University of Ottawa as well, and obviously coaching locally and with youth programs and stuff like that. Was the passion always there? There had to be some tough times in there, because it's not easy to get the foot in the door with the Blackhawks. And that's when I first heard about Andrew Allen, because I was just starting to get back into this, and I started hearing this name from all these different goalies that have worked with you and all these good reviews. But that period before you get that opportunity can be tough. Any advice for other young goalie coaches that are doing the same thing right now in terms of, trying to work on their craft and take advantage of as many opportunities as they can, waiting for the one that actually can become a career?
Yeah, I dealt with it both in my playing career and coaching career. I'll give you a quick on the playing side. I was in my second year pro. I had my first year pro, obviously I backed up 2 games in the NHL. My second year I signed in Detroit system, but in American League East Coast League 2A with Grand Rapids and Dayton in the East Coast League. And that year wasn't going near as well for me as the first year. And I was older coming out of college anyway. So I was, I think by this time, 26 years old. And I was like, man, is this really for me? Should I continue? Should I grind through this? And I went through all that, and I got traded from Dayton to Trenton, and had 3 shutouts in a row starting in Trenton, and then played one more game, got called up to the American League in Binghamton, because they had so many injuries. And within a month, I had an NHL contract for the next year with the Ottawa Senators. So in my playing career was that you go through in your head, and it's like, you know what, just finish the year. Don't make decisions until you're through the season. Then you'll make educated decisions. So same thing in my coaching career. I was, like I said, trying to put as many irons in the fire as I could. And I didn't have any kids yet. My wife was very, very patient and supportive of me to follow this dream. And I said, let's see what I can do. I had this dream. I want to be an NHL goalie coach. I think I could do it, but I needed to take the steps. And it was, I was doing everything from 6-year-olds to Japanese pro guys that were older than me at the time, that were 36 years old. Yutaka Fukufuji, who played for the LA Kings, he was part of our system. So there was times in there where you're like, well, this is great and all, but maybe I just take this government job and have stability, but man, it worked out. I got the development role in Chicago. It's all about getting somebody to interview you or take a phone call and in Chicago, I was lucky enough to have people that Ted Dent and Mike Haviland, who had coached me in the East Coast League, they were in Chicago system. They say, hey, just interview this guy, and I got to talk with Stefan Waite over dinner one night about this role in Chicago. And about halfway through the dinner, I knew I had it. We were on the same wavelength. Steph was talking away to me like he had known me for years. I was speaking French to him. I obviously have some French being Ottawa. He was loving it. So that's what got me back into the pro game as a coach. And then from there, I really got to learn, and I really got to feel that, this is for me. And I was able to transition from Chicago to a head role in Buffalo, which was my dream. And the way it goes in this business, I got it for 4 years, 4 good years of learning, and I'd love to do it again in a different situation. But at the same time, the opportunities it's afforded me to now be able to be in the game with Seattle is maybe this is it. I don't know yet, right? So it's a lot of fun to be just in the game and doing what I'm doing. So I guess that's my advice: is you gotta stick with it and keep that passion, because you just never know when that opportunity is going to come.
This is why I loved every conversation I got to have with you when you come through town with Buffalo, because the passion always came through. I mean, just as it's coming through now, and the sincerity and the fact that you love this game. Like, we use the word, I think Johan Hedberg once called me a goalie nerd and said it was with respect, but you have to have that passion to go through the grind, I think. And the other part that jumps out there is, we talked earlier about being a pro and being prepared for opportunity. It sounds like that was part of your path as a coach, that when you had the opportunity to get the interview, you were ready, you'd done the work. It was about being a pro on that side of the equation as well.
For sure. And I think for me, the pride that comes with working with goaltenders and watching them realize their dreams, it's not, in our position, it's not really, obviously everybody has to look out for themselves to a certain degree, but it's not about us. It's about the goaltenders and how they perform. And, the guys like Antti Ranta and Scott Darling and Carter Hutton, for me, guys like this that I had in the minors, that there were ups and downs with all of them. There's times that all of them were like, man, am I really going to make it? When you see them perform at the level they do at the NHL level, you feel proud. You feel like they're one of your kids, and that's where I bring my passion and my enthusiasm from, is to help them realize their dreams. Just be a part of it. Just sometimes it's a little light switch that helps them,
So I got to ask, because you are, like you said, you've had an opportunity and you were doing it even when you were in the NHL and in the American League, working with kids. When you go back to that, where's the focus? Because we've heard a lot of talk, and when we talked earlier about how Robin Lehner, another guy you've worked with, has talked about unpredictability and those stories that we've written. At a younger age, I think there are times, and this isn't meant to be critical of goaltending coaches in Canada or in North America overall by any means, because they're great. Are there times where, like, I'd be curious where you would start with kids in terms of building their foundation, their skills, and can we at times be guilty? I don't want to say as a nation. I think it can happen all over the world of maybe trying to get a little, like, is there a hazard? Really poorly worded question by me, but I have a B game too. Is there a risk in getting too technical at too young an age? I'd be curious where you would start and how that progression would look for you. And I know it depends on each individual athlete, but we're seeing it with Linus the other day talked about maybe in Sweden, he feels like it's a little technical at too young an age. So I'm just kind of curious, where would you start and what would your focus be with a young kid?
I start, the foundation for me is our base, is our feet. And I think in my opinion, you can't be too technical with your feet. You need to be quick. You need to be strong on your feet. You need to be able to get to position. Where to me, I believe as well that sometimes we get way too technical is how to make the save process. To me, the save process is a very individual thing. And to me, the part that I teach with young kids the most is getting into position. Get there. And that's the feet. That's the quickness. That's the transferring from butterfly to a standing position. That's butterfly sliding into position. Get there. Then let your natural instincts, abilities take over and make the save. And that's the way I apply. It's kind of, to me, like a 3-step process. Before the shot, which to me is a technical move. The actual save selection is totally up to you. And then the recovery out of it is, again, a little bit more, footwork and a technical situation. So that's kind of the way I do it with young kids. And it's same with the pros. If you look at Robin, the difference between Robin and Linus, between Robin Lehner and Linus Ullmark, both Swedish goalies, but both play a very different way. You can't cookie cutter them for me. You have to work with what their strengths are and areas that they need to work on. And I think that, Robin was such a flow goaltender, and you see him still to this day. He just reads so well, that when he's really on, he's reading the play at an elite level. And Linus has come along so way, and he's an edge control guy, and he's a more positional guy, and he's big, and his whole thing is, and he's gotten so much better, is tracking the puck and reacting to pucks with his hand and not being that robotic, and I think that's where probably Linus is talking about from a younger age. Do they teach every goalie the exact same way? And I think that's where we got to let goalies be themselves as well. Everybody has a personality. If you look at a Robin Lehner versus a Semyon Varlamov, or there's two very different human beings and two very different goaltenders there. So to me, you can't teach them exactly the same.
It's perfect. It goes back to that whole thing about everybody has different mixes of the elements that are required, and how they blend together is unique to the individual. Drill work, how can you encourage that type of, like you said, when you're working with them? And I think back to Carter Hutton, who was a guy you had in Rockford and played a key role in him springboarding to the NHL from Rockford, and then had him again in Buffalo. And he was a guy that talked to us about how, and I think even at InGoal and me as a writer, not little ignorant, had written in the past about how practices can be bad for goalies. And he was the guy that told me, hey, no, embrace the dynamic, tough parts of practice, because sometimes the goalie specific stuff can be too predictable. So that's a two-parter. Do we need to make sure that even when things are tough, we're finding ways to take positives or take something out of it as a goalie? And are there things on the other side that we can do as goalie coaches to make sure that it's not always predictable? That, yeah, we can ingrain something we need to do technically, but if every save is from the same spot and the same shot and they know it, at some point that's a negative too.
Yeah, I believe a lot. So my process and how I worked with Carter and everybody basically is, before practice is a controlled goaltender environment. So whatever, we work with a theme for the day, whatever, if say the theme's post play for the day, everything, the footwork we would do before practice, the before practice shooting drills would all be based around that. And that would have been built based on conversations I had with the goalies, what we've seen on video, what right at that point we felt we need a little more of. Then during practice, you have to compete. And I feel you got to turn your brain off a little bit. It's not going to be structured just for the goalies. And you have to find the most game-like situations in practice drills and really play them live. And then other drills is more about just picking up the release and following the puck and not getting so wound up on if you get scored on it. You have to understand that some of the drills are for flow, and so I feel during practice, you kind of turn that brain off a little bit from that standpoint. Then after practice, if we did get a chance, or whatever goalie I'm working with after practice, you have more guys out there. You play more game-like, more battle type situations where it's not predictable. And then that way I found we get a good mix of technical versus unpredictability. And that's how I always pattern my practices. And you always have to juggle based on travel schedule and all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot of fun to get some technical work in where it's a little quieter before practice. And I found Carter loved routine, and he needed to feel good when practice started. In order for him to be at his best, he wanted that time before practice to just get some work done, and then he could be Carter Hutton and just flow with it.
Those games at the end, and last one, I promise, but because we've been at this a while, but the games at the end, value there in creating a competitive environment that may still have a technical element, but the need to compete and go outside of technique. Is there value there, not just for the goaltender, but in that once you sort of trigger that competitive environment, you're going to get more out of the players shooting on them too?
100%. And I even took to the point that before we start the drill, after practice, I say, listen, goalies, we're looking for this. Players, you got to score from these situations. You got to find ways to score. So I tried to involve everybody, and I always found it as a thing that players wanted to stay out. And if they wanted to stay out, partly was because they were enjoying what they were doing, right? So to me, it's important. If you want shooters to be involved in the drill and you want shooters to be engaged so it's better for the goaltenders, there's got to be some fun for the players in it as well. So we tried to find all kinds of different scenarios and little competitive games and bring the competitive juices. And I found that really helps everybody get involved and everybody get something out of the drill.
See, we can tie this right back to that great Seattle Kraken hat you're wearing. It's still a game, just like the name. It needs to be fun. They knocked it out of the park, and I know you're going to knock it out of the park with them too, Andrew. Listen, I thank you so much for the time today. Enjoyed catching up. Like I've teased this one before because every time you came through town, it would start maybe with interviews with your guys, but it would end up being 3 or 4, whether it was both goalies or just one, and you and me in the room talking about goaltending. I always learned something. And the passion always came through, and I always enjoyed the conversation, and I know our audience will too. So thank you. Congrats on the gig. And thank you so much for taking the time for catching up with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kevin. Honestly, same here. It's a lot of fun. Any chance I got a chance to talk with you face to face, and these Zoom calls were basically face to face anyway. So I appreciate it. A lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing you and talking to you again in the future.
Yeah, out on the West Coast here. That's I can't wait to we'll get these borders back open and get you familiar with the I-5 from chasing Carruth and those guys down from Portland and Everett. So we know all the routes. We'll find a coffee stop along the way and catch up when things are back open. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thanks.
This will be very childish of me. Great interview. Awesome conversation, Woody. But when Andrew is talking about repping the hat and stuff, just a cool logo and a great name. And I'm like, that's a cool hat. I'd like to wear that hat.
Yeah, it's funny. We joked about that off air too. Like my girls just haven't really gravitated towards hockey, probably because they've been surrounded by it their entire lives. But even they were like, ooh, like that logo, that we're a family that when the borders are open, Seattle's kind of a weekend retreat for us just down the I-5 from Vancouver and one of our favorite cities. And so the idea, I haven't done this frankly ever, like 20 years covering the NHL now, but the idea of going down and watching another team play and they, teenage daughters are excited about that logo and the way they've built that brand. And that tells me, if non-hockey fan teenage girls are loving it, and my daughter's a critic of anything I do or wear, that's a pretty good sign. You've hit a home run there. I love it. It's fun. Like Andrew said, talking about games and playing games, it needs to be fun. It's still a game, and I think I think the Kraken nailed it with their logo and everything.
But you follow up the night club atmosphere at T-Mobile Arena in Vegas, and this cool logo and name. It's back-to-back nice expansion stories for the National Hockey League.
And an excuse to go to Seattle is never a bad thing. As much as
good
Vancouver
point.
Is very similar, we've got some spots down there we love to hit. It's one of our favorite cities.
Sounds like an in-goal road trip.
Should we invite Hutch?
Bugger off.
Woody just hammered his microphone because he's laughing so hard.
I deserve it finally.
There was contact. We will get together on a road trip as soon as we're through all of this pandemic and we get back to normal. And we're looking forward to it greatly. But just a Woody or Hutch, just an observation, comment on what you heard from Ed.
Well, I actually thought he was one of the most forthcoming about the actual role of a goaltending coach today. And I know we've had lots of guys on, and they talk generally about how they spend their time. But I was just fascinated as he walked us through what he's doing on the ice with these guys on a game day to prepare them for the game, and how each segment of that day is a little bit different. How his role as a mental coach to a degree is part of that as well. I just felt that we got a peek inside in a more detailed way maybe than we have before, and it was great to hear that from him. And he also is just so personable, Woody. I haven't had the pleasure that you have, but I felt like we were talking to somebody that we just might know from the rink down the road. Maybe that's him talking about his interest in maintaining that connection to the youth game and working with young goaltenders. But I really felt a little bit closer to the National Hockey League listening to that interview. And I think that's one of the goals that we had when we put InGoal together, was to bring some fans sort of behind the curtain, so to speak. So well done.
Easy when it's, like I said, there's a reason every time, just there's a passion there that comes through. The conversations are always enjoyable. So I'm glad that, and thank you to the Seattle Kraken too, because not all teams are going to make their goalie, in Andrew's case, professional goalie scout right now. But they don't always make those personnel available for these types of interviews. We went through all the proper channels to get this, made sure that we weren't going to, that it wasn't going to be a problem for him professionally. And, sort of true to that brand, the Kraken franchise was absolutely go ahead. And so we really appreciate that because like I said, I've had the pleasure of these conversations, so I knew it was going to be good. And I'm glad that it came through the same way for you guys, and hopefully will for our audience as well.
Well done. Enjoyed it. And at a time when everybody's going back to school, it's nice to have the episode of InGoal Radio, the podcast, get straight A's with Andrew Allen, the feature interview on InGoal Radio, the podcast. On behalf of Kevin Woodley and David Hutchison, I'm Darren Millard. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again.